So today we're going to talk about population growth rate, which can be abbreviated as PGR. So population growth rate is just how fast a population grows. And so when we look at the population growth rate, we look at a couple things. So one, we look at the birth rate. So how many members of that population are being born? We look at the death rate, how many are dying. We look at emigration, which is how many individuals are moving away from a population. And then we look at immigration, which is how many individuals are moving into a population. So then when we look at population growth, we can graph it just to see the trend in that model. And so one trend is called exponential growth. Exponential growth makes this curve, we call it J-shaped. So if you take a look at this line here, do you see how that kind of looks like a J? And so all populations will grow exponentially until they reach some sort of limiting factor that's going to slow down the growth. Once that limiting factor is reached and the growth slows down, they enter the logistic growth model, which is shown in this graph. And this looks like an S-shaped. Okay, so if you look at this line, do you see how that looks like an S? And so in the logistic growth model, the population's growth is going to slow or it'll end up stopping following that exponential growth. Okay, so here, this is our exponential growth. Okay, if you look right here, that looks like the J shape. And then something happens where that growth starts to slow down, or it might come to a complete stop and it'll just level off. And when it levels off, this is called the population's carrying capacity. So the carrying capacity is just the maximum number of individuals in a species that an environment can support for long term. Okay. So this can be limited by like energy, it can be limited by water, oxygen available, or it can be limited by like food or nutrients. So what do you think happens when a population reaches its carrying capacity? So once that population nears the carrying capacity, it means resources are going to become limited. Okay, so there could be like less oxygen, less water, less food. And so if the population exceeds the carrying capacity, then there's not enough resources to support that population, and the number of deaths are going to exceed the number of births, which is going to limit how that population can grow, which is why we see that population level off and it can't grow any further.